You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Kendall King, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones with Andrew Joseph and Scotty Bordelon.
We know Arkansas's bowl opponent, the Razorbacks, looking for a new defensive coordinator, more transfers out of the program. Lots to unpack today on the Whole Hog Football Podcast with Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph of Whole Hog Sports. I'm Matt Jones. We learned the Razorbacks' bowl opponent last weekend. They're going to play Kansas in the Liberty Bowl in Memphis on December 28th. Really not a surprising bowl destination for the Razorbacks if you just kind of go back and look at what we talked about over the past month, where they fit into kind of the overall bowl picture in the SEC. We thought they would probably fall into one of these group of 6 bowl games, which the Liberty Bowl is one of those. The fact they lost to Missouri in the season finale made you think that maybe the Razorbacks might fall down to like Birmingham or the Gasparilla Bowl in Tampa. There's some reports that Missouri didn't want to play in the Liberty Bowl. They've refuted those, but that they didn't want to play Kansas in a bowl game. Of course, that's a long-time rivalry that has been dormant since Missouri left for the Big 12. For whatever reason, Arkansas got into the Liberty Bowl. They're there. They're going to play in Memphis. It's a game that we've thought for some time is very interested in Arkansas. The Razorbacks always bring a lot of people over to Memphis. Probably going to be that way against Kansas, although, and we'll get into this a little bit later, it doesn't feel like there's quite as much enthusiasm for this Razorback Liberty Bowl as there was in 2009 in Bobby Petrino's second season, or as there was in 2015 in Brett Bielema's third season. Both of those years, the Razorbacks finished the year a lot better than they finished this year. Of course, they went 1-3 in November. Scotty, you and I kind of combined the night that the bowl announcement was made for Kansas, looking into them a little bit. They're in the second season under Lance Leopold. They're 6-6 this year. They actually started out 5-0. We all remember they were on College Game Day. They were ranked in the AP. They were one of the feel-good stories early in the year. And then reality kind of set in. They had to play a Big 12 schedule. They played better against Big 12 opponents than they have in a lot of the previous years. But still, they come into Memphis, losers of 6 of their last 7. So you got a couple of teams in the Liberty Bowl where they're both bowl eligible, but they're both bowl eligible as 6-6, and neither of them really have played their best football in over a month.
No, that's very true. And when I saw the matchup first come out, I've kind of followed a little bit of Kansas's season, and I definitely remember when game day was in Lawrence for, I believe it was the TCU game. And, after that weekend, you didn't really hear anything about Kansas. And then, we all know how Arkansas season has gone. So when I first saw that matchup, it kind of seemed like both of these programs, both of these teams are looking for something of a get right game, I guess, to maybe give you a little bit of a shot in the arm going into the off season. Because Kansas, they started really hot and then they faded down the stretch, and then Arkansas season was just completely up and down after a fairly decent start to the season. Arkansas season just completely changed after, I think, that Texas A&M game that they were firmly in control of, and Kansas season changed after game day came. So it's a couple teams that are, they're probably wanting to take a little bit of frustration from the regular season out on their opponent, but whether they're capable of doing that or not, we'll see. I would imagine that Kansas is probably going through some roster turnover similarly to Arkansas. It's just kind of the nature of the beast at this point, the way that college football is going. So I would imagine Kansas probably doesn't look like it did at the beginning of the season, and Arkansas really won't. Both of their starting linebackers are going to be out with Bumper Pool and Drew Sanders. Drew obviously declared for the draft, and even on the offensive side of the ball, like Arkansas's got some guys that won't be playing that were pretty key to the success that they were able to have. So it just seems like both of these teams are looking for something positive, going into the off season full force.
For Arkansas, Ricky Stromberg is not going to play the center. He won the Jacobs Award this week as the best blocker in the SEC. Jaden Hazelwood is not going to play the receiver who's been, one of their better pass catchers this year. Transfer from Oklahoma. He, Stromberg, and Drew Sanders have all declared for the NFL draft. And then maybe one of the big surprises, I think, that there's been from a personnel standpoint since the season ended is that Ketron Jackson's not going to play in this bowl game. And it was interesting on the Sunday night that Arkansas and Kansas were, announced as opponents in the bowl game. Sam Pittman was asked about, some of these players who weren't going to play, and he had mentioned that with Hazelwood out, it would give them an opportunity to put Ketron Jackson in the slot and kind of evaluate him there because they felt like that was going to be his position moving forward. And then lo and behold, less than 48 hours later, Ketron Jackson announces that he's in the transfer portal. And so I think that one probably caught Arkansas off guard a little bit. And you look at, them right now, from a receiver standpoint, you got Matt Landers, and I don't know where the rest of your production comes from outside of maybe Trey Knox, the tight end.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was a little bit surprised too, with Ketron leaving because it just seemed like with Hazelwood out that Arkansas was going to turn to Matt Landers if Matt Landers plays in the game. I think that's a decision that we also need to pay attention to because if Landers decides to go pro or opts out of the bowl game, Arkansas will be down 3 of its top 4 pass catchers from this season. But with Hazelwood out, I thought Ketron had next, kind of similarly to how Pooh Paul and I think Jordan Crook have next at the linebacker position with Drew Sanders and Bumper Pool gone. And Ketron, early in the season or maybe, starting week 3, and then he had like a 5-week stretch where he was, if not, making big plays, he was, pretty reliable target. I remember the Texas A&M game, he had 1 catch in the first quarter for a touchdown, didn't have another catch that game. The next week they play Alabama and he's felt like he was the only wide receiver that had a pulse that game. And he looked to me the part of, the best receiver in that group at that point in the season. And I ended up doing a feature story on him about midway through the year. And, I thought I've always really liked Ketron. I think you can just look at him and see that he's just, he's oozes potential. But with Matt Landers and Hazelwood and, Arkansas's ability to run the ball, I mean, there's not enough footballs to go around for that guy. I mean, it really sucks for Arkansas to lose him because he was your top rated player, I believe, in the 2021 class, according to 247 Sports. So it's a blow. And now I think Arkansas has got to lean on maybe even some younger guys than Ketron in the bowl game at receiver. And I think they're really going to have to lean on the run game and KJ running the ball too.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that he's going to be he was the most surprising departure from the Razorbacks to enter the transfer portal. And I think that's true. And while I think that's probably the one that has disappointed Razorback fans the most to this point, he's also not leaving like a huge void of production because he had 16 catches total. And you did mention his little span. I think he had a 3-week span where he had 8 catches in those 3 weeks, which was half of his season production. And it seemed like he was started off behind Warren Thompson. I think Warren Thompson got injured right around week 4, and then it looked like Ketron passed him up on the depth chart, which ultimately led to Warren Thompson leaving the team. And so you kind of thought that maybe Ketron was coming into his own and would become one of those top targets. But then over the final 4 weeks, he still only made 4 catches. He only had more than 1 catch in one of those final 4 games. And so it just looked like it never really clicked. And it is disappointing because he was in a prime position to be that go-to guy, but it just never materialized.
I think something that should be noted too about Ketron's maybe his slide or lack of production down the stretch of the season, maybe the last 4 or 5 games. I think that coincided with Matt Landers coming on a little bit. Like Landers was, to me, he's their best pass catcher, maybe the last 5 weeks of the season. And that's something he did his last season at Toledo too. So I wasn't all that surprised that Landers finished the season strong. And I think by the end of the year, it was just super, super evident that Hazelwood and Landers were their top guys. And maybe Ketron was just a little bit unhappy with his role.
That slot role is so important in this offense. Hazelwood probably has been targeted almost as much, if not more, than any other receiver on the team this year.
For sure, yeah.
I think it said something about what they thought of Jackson as a receiver, that the plans were that they were going to put him in that role. And it makes me wonder, who mans that position for Arkansas in this bowl game? Is it do we see an Isaiah Satania who hasn't played much this year because of an ankle injury? Do we see him, get more into the game plan? I'm really interested to see what happens there, Scotty.
Yeah, I think Satania is a guy that could fill that role, hypothetically. I mean, we don't know really anything yet. I think we've talked to Sam once since the end of the Missouri game. And so I think there's a lot of things up in the air, but Isaiah, I think he's played 6 offensive snaps this year. So, a great deal of playing time would be pretty much new to him. But I think, he was hampered early in the year too. I think that kind of gets forgotten sometimes, like had an ankle injury early in the year that kind of hampered him, limited him. And, when he's healthy, he's got really good off the line of scrimmage burst. And then clearly, Matt, this from having covered him when he was at Fayetteville High, like he's got speed in the open field that not a lot of defensive backs can handle. If there is anything that I question, and I don't even know if it's a question, it's just, his physicality, when defensive backs maybe press him on the line of scrimmage, is he able to get off that man pressure right at the line of scrimmage? But he's an option too. And something that's intriguing, and I have no idea if Arkansas would do this, but I think it's kind of interesting. There was some talk about Quincy McAdoo playing both ways. Maybe if Arkansas is in a position where they feel like they need to do that, maybe it's something they do, and maybe try to figure out what the plan is on the defensive side of the ball. I do think Arkansas's got some options, like Jaden Wilson's another one, and Bryce Stevens as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of youth, I think, on the perimeter for Arkansas in the ball game.
One of the other things that happened with Satania, of course, is that he didn't go through spring practice because he stayed at Fayetteville High and ran track. Obviously going to run track for the Razorbacks as well. And so he missed that install in the spring, and he was kind of working double time, so to speak, during the August portion of practice, and then suffers that injury in August. And so there have been some setbacks there for him that are, really unique to his situation. Another big piece that's going to be missing for Arkansas in the bowl game is Barry Odom. The defensive coordinator is going to UNLV. Was announced their head coach earlier this week. Got a 5-year deal there. The assumption is he'll probably take some Arkansas staff members with him. I don't know if any of them are going to go with him before the bowl game, but it's an interesting time there for him because he's trying to build a roster before that early signing date that's coming up here in just a little over a week. And so it'll be interesting to see how that works out heading into the bowl game. Sam Pittman hasn't spoken to reporters since Odom left for UNLV, so we don't know how they're going to run their defense during this game against Kansas. You look at Arkansas's staff. Deke Adams, way back in his career, close to 20 years ago on the FCS level, had some coordinating experience. Dominic Bowman, more recently, I believe at Austin Peay, was either a defensive coordinator or a co-defensive coordinator there. So you've got a couple of members on staff who have that experience calling plays during a game as a coordinator. But, I think having that, say what you want about Arkansas's defense this year, and certainly it left itself open for, a lot of criticism. But, not having Barry Odom on the staff for this game, I think is a really big deal for Arkansas, especially in light of all the players that they're going to be missing, especially on defense. No Drew Sanders, no Bumper Poole, who underwent hip surgery after the end of the season. That's almost 200 tackles that you're missing in this game.
I'm not exactly sure because we have, like Matt mentioned, we haven't talked to Sam since all of this has gone down. I don't know what direction they turn to. I think if you're looking for somebody Barry Odom-like, I think that person could be Michael Scherer. I really do think that Scherer is a kind of a rising star on the, in terms of a defensive coach in college football right now. And, just the work that he's done with Bumper and Drew Sanders, and, Pooh Paul emerged as a super big time talent for Arkansas this year. And he's done that under Michael Scherer. And we'll see, I guess, in the bowl game, should Jordan Crook play, kind of what he's capable of. And, Scherer is Barry Odom's guy. Like, he played for Barry at Missouri. So I think if you're looking for, someone who maybe thinks similarly, but has maybe some innovative ideas that vary from Odom, I think that could be a direction you go. If you want maybe an authoritative voice. I don't think there's anybody better on that defensive side of the ball than Deke Adams. And Matt mentioned that, he's got some defensive coordinator, background. He was that at North Carolina A&T, and then before that at OBU. There's obviously a much bigger stage than at both of those schools, but he does have that ability, and I think he's got a voice that is loud and authoritative, like I mentioned, and I think he could definitely rally guys on the defensive side of the ball that are still there.
The other thing about Scherer is that, of course, he's got all those ties to Odom, played for him at Missouri, was part of his coaching staff there, and came over here to Arkansas with him. You wonder about him at a level like the Group of Five, if whether or not he might be in contention to be like a coordinator type at UNLV. I don't know if that'll happen, but it's certainly a thought that probably has crossed a lot of people's minds. Maybe even Barry Odom's, as he looks to assemble that UNLV coaching staff. We're going to talk more about Arkansas's coordinators here in just a little bit. In particular, what we think Arkansas might be looking at from a defensive coordinator perspective. Going back to Kansas for a minute, you look at their season, and there are some similarities, I think, to Kansas and Arkansas. One of the big ones being that when they started out 5-0, they were getting really good quarterback play, and then their quarterback got hurt, and ironically, they've got a quarterback named Jaden Daniels, and you spell Jaden differently than you do the LSU quarterback, and I don't know that he's quite at that capability, but he was a very good quarterback for them early in the season. He gets hurt, doesn't come back until I think maybe the final couple of games of the regular season, and they didn't play well without him. Similar to Arkansas didn't play well without KJ Jefferson this season. Daniels is I think a key there for Kansas. And then Scotty, you wrote about their running game. That's really the strength of their offense this year.
Yeah, it seems to be. I was looking at CFBstats.com, and they're averaging over 190 yards per game on the ground, which is pretty impressive. They've got a running back named Devin Neal, who I think he's, there are some players, and I think Bumper Pool might be similar. I mean, he's not from Fayetteville. Devin Neal is from Lawrence, and they got him. I think he was like a 4-star prospect when he came out of high school, and Lance Leopold was talking earlier in the season when they became bowl eligible that, Neal chose Kansas because he wanted to be a Jayhawk, not necessarily because he wanted to play for that coaching staff. And Leopold was like, hey man, that's fine with me. Totally understand it. And it's like, he's kind of made that program. I don't want to say he's made it what it is, but he's helped elevate it certainly early in Leopold's tenure there. But he had a huge game against Oklahoma State that helped Kansas become bowl eligible. I think he ran for over 230 yards, just really impressive. And then the next week he ran for over 190 against Texas Tech. So those are like the two clearly the two biggest games that he's had this year. In some of his other games, he's been pretty so-so, but I mean, those two games against OSU and Texas Tech, probably not exactly known for a great run defense, but have had some decent defenses in the past, especially Oklahoma State, I would say. I think Arkansas's got to be leery of them. And when you don't have Drew Sanders and Bumper Pool out there to run you down, that can create some challenges. But I think it's something that Pooh Paul is probably going to be pretty geared up for. He's been really great. Rushing the passer, and Jordan Crook's been really good, in some limited snaps and run defense. So those two guys are going to get tested, I would imagine. And, maybe somebody like Jackson Woodard too might see in that mix. But yeah, Kansas run game's been pretty solid. And it'll be interesting, I guess, for me to see how Arkansas game plans for Devin Neal.
Yeah, I think whichever defense can stop the run is going to have probably the best shot of winning this game, just because both offenses are such potent rushing attacks. And I was looking at Kansas's last two games against K-State and Texas, and they have two very good running backs. And Deuce Vaughn for K-State ran for almost 150 yards against them their last game out. And then I looked up the box score of the 55-14 beating that Texas put on KU, and Bijan Robinson had a field day running for 243 yards and 4 touchdowns against them. And so maybe it becomes the Rocket Sanders show. A lot of fans bemoan the fact that he only got 10 carries against Mizzou when he was trying to win the SEC rushing title. And so maybe he makes up for it here.
Those weren't the only games where Kansas struggled to stop the run this year. There were 5 times this year that KU gave up at least 230 rushing yards. Andrew, you mentioned K-State 230 yards. Texas, they gave up 427 yards in that game. That was a season high for Kansas. Also gave up 264 to Texas Tech, 273 to Baylor, 298 to Oklahoma. All of those, of course, Big 12 games. They rank 119th nationally in run defense. Arkansas ranks 9th nationally in rushing offense. And so certainly that's really, I feel like, the big matchup to watch, in terms of what might favor Arkansas is the ability to run against Kansas. One thing, though, of course, you got to, again, go back and kind of make up for these missing parts. Ricky Stromberg's not going to be in there at center, and he's been such an integral piece to what Arkansas is doing. And, in the last time that we had an opportunity to talk to Sam Pittman, Scotty, he was asked, does Bo Limmer move over to center? He said that's a possibility, but I guess there's also a possibility that Marcus Henderson, who dealt with a lot of injuries during the preseason, early in the season, that he might slide in there at center.
Yeah, that was, I think the last time we did talk to Sam was December 4th. So it was the night that we found out that Arkansas was going to play Kansas in the Liberty Bowl. Did a brief 10 or 15 minute teleconference with him, and he was asked about, replacing some of the guys that are leaving, like namely Ricky Stromberg as center. Center's obviously a really big position, one of the 2 players that touches the ball every snap. So you got to get that figured out. And the first name that Sam mentioned was Marcus Henderson. And I thought that was interesting because early, like in the preseason during fall camp, Henderson was a guy that, going in, we thought might be able to battle for or secure a backup job. And he just could not get over a pectoral injury. I've never had that, but I would imagine it's, pretty debilitating, to, if you want to play center at a high level, to not have a intact pec, but that's pretty important. But it seems like he fell behind a little bit in terms of, being able to get on the field and develop. Didn't play a snap this year. I think it's interesting, and maybe Sam said it mostly because the game's in Memphis. Marcus Henderson's from Memphis. So that could be something to keep an eye on. I'm not ruling out Marcus Henderson by any stretch. Maybe they could, get a jump start on, maybe getting Marcus, more in tune with playing center full time for next year by playing him in this ball game and keeping Bo Limmer at right guard. But I remember I've asked Sam several times about Bo Limmer this year because he just had a really terrific year at right guard. What do you think about his future? And he said he could be a guy that, plays center down the line and could, potentially play center in the league. So I think there's a couple options there. They're going to do their best to get their 5 best on the field on the offensive line. And I think if I had to say right now, I would guess that it would be moving Limmer over to right guard, or from right guard to center, and then sliding Limmer's back up into that right guard spot.
Yeah, of course, there's some other things you could do to maybe get Tykees Crawford on the field too. Pittman's talked a lot about having a center who is a great communicator. And that was one of the things they thought that was really a strong point or a strong suit for Ricky Stromberg, and not having him in that bowl game against Kansas. Again, just all kinds of little intangibles with all of this roster movement that you kind of have to take into consideration as the Razorbacks get ready to play this bowl game. The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kindle King Design, Display, Signage, KindleKing.com. That's KendalKing.com.
The Kindle King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omnichannel creative services, through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kindle King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today. Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
Arkansas against Kansas in the Liberty Bowl on December 28th in Memphis. It's going to be a 4:30 kickoff. It'll be televised by ESPN. Dan Mullen, the former Florida coach, is going to be on the call in that game, by the way. The first time I believe that he's been in the booth this season for ESPN. He's going to be calling that game between the Razorbacks and the Jayhawks. First time that these two teams have played, by the way, since 1906. Kansas
I remember
won.
that game.
Do you? I think Bob Holt covered that game for the Arkansas Gazette. No, just kidding. No, we know you. Hey, you know we love you, Bob. The Razorbacks lost that game 37-5. That was the end of a 2-year agreement between Arkansas and KU to play home and home in Lawrence and in Fayetteville. And so it's been 116 years since Arkansas and Kansas played. Scotty, you and I were talking, it would be really great maybe if the Liberty Bowl would maybe get the basketball teams to participate in this and
Absolutely.
maybe get Arkansas KU to play at FedEx Forum the night before.
Yeah, that would be sweet. Yeah, I guess they'll just have to settle for Phoenix and Memphis and FedEx that night. But yeah, that'd drive a lot of interest.
It certainly would. I've always thought it'd be interesting, for Arkansas and KU or Arkansas and Kansas State to play more just because of the proximity of. I've never really understood why they haven't played more often than, just in K-State's, or in the case of K-State, the bowl games, and of course KU, it's been 116 years since these teams played. And for Kansas, this year, this bowl game has a much different feel, I feel like, for Kansas than it does for Arkansas. And I was reading within the last day or so that Kansas has actually sold out its initial allotment of tickets and has requested more from the Liberty Bowl. Now, I don't know what that allotment number is. It might be 6,000 tickets, but I think that there's going to be some enthusiasm on Kansas' part to play in this bowl game just because they have not played in a bowl game since 2008. The Insight Bowl was the last time that they played in a bowl game. That game hadn't even existed, I think, in more than 10 years. And so, you're talking about KU coming into this for the first time in 14 years playing in a bowl game. I think there's some disappointment from the ticket buyers from Arkansas, the fact that they're playing in this game. Like I said earlier, when they played East Carolina in 2009, it was to end Bobby Petrino's second season, and there was a lot of enthusiasm about the program. When they played Kansas State to end the 2015 season, that ended an 8-win season for the Razorbacks in 2015, where they won a lot of games there at the end, and it was really the height of the popularity that whatever popularity Brett Bielema had when he was at Arkansas. And so I don't feel that going into this one. I mean, to you, it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of enthusiasm. I still think that when we get to Memphis in a few weeks and you get out on Beale Street, you're going to see a lot of Razorback fans down there. When you get into the stadium on the day of the bowl game, it's still going to be predominantly red. I just don't know that this is going to be one of those games where you see the 62,000 people in the seats and it feel like a Razorback home game quite like it did in those past 2 trips to Memphis.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of the way that non-playoff bowl games are trending in general, just because of so many bowl opt-outs or entering the transfer portal early. I just think that, and I don't blame them for doing that, and I think they should do whatever is best for them. But I think it does kind of lessen the intrigue, or at least changes it. For now, you're not kind of instead of watching your team kind of wrap up their season, you're kind of watching to get a glimpse at what you're hoping to see next season. So it's almost in a way like a glorified like little spring game or a preview of what to expect next year.
Yeah, I think for some Arkansas fans, I think they may be just tuning into the bowl game just so they can form opinions going into the offseason on who they think can contribute next year, which coaches should stick around, which ones shouldn't. I do agree with Matt. I think once the bowl game gets here, that there will be a little bit more enthusiasm, but no offense to the Liberty Bowl, but I think Arkansas fans are pretty disappointed in going to the Liberty Bowl, especially after the way that they finished last season with such a punch. Like there were few teams in the SEC outside of like the top dogs in the league that were playing better than Arkansas down the stretch. And then this year was kind of polar opposite, and they're limping into a 6-6 bowl game. Like I don't know what there's just on the surface, there's not just a whole lot to be enthusiastic about in terms of the team you're playing. It's not exactly the bowl game that you want to be into, and then the way that the team performed down the stretch. But I think once we get closer to that bowl game, there will be a little bit of excitement, but some of that could be coming from behind the bar down on Beale Street too.
It's interesting you say that, Scotty, because I feel like there's this expectation among people that you can never have a step back from the season before. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And we heard Sam Pittman talk about this before the season. He said, guys, we won 9 games last year. There's not a lot of win totals you can go to above that in the SEC. And every one of those win totals above 9 games is a really huge step when you're playing the type of competition that they're playing, for the Razorbacks. And so, I'm really hopeful from, just I don't know, I guess I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm hopeful that people understand that you can be disappointed with having a 6-6 season, but that it's one of those deals like Nolan would always say, not all sickness is death. It doesn't mean the program's necessarily in reverse. I don't feel that way, and I've actually been working on a column for our magazine, kind of talking about that. The fact that people probably don't want to hear this, but they're a handful of plays away from winning 10 games. Now you could probably make that argument in reverse, like a game like Missouri State, for instance. They could have potentially lost that without a couple of big plays there in the fourth quarter that turned that momentum. But it just doesn't feel to me like Arkansas is quite as far away from being a real competitor in the SEC as a 6-6 record might indicate. We talked about KJ Jefferson not playing this year and how that impacted the LSU game. It impacted the Liberty game. I think it impacted the Mississippi State game. I don't think they lose that one in a blowout if he's playing. I think that they might win that game in Starkville. They moved the ball up and down the field against Mississippi State, just couldn't punch it in the red zone. And so I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just kind of a long-winded way to say that I think that, in any program, you're going to have these years where you can't compare it necessarily to the year before because there's just those natural years where you have injuries like they had this year and how it affected their defense, and they weren't able to play defense quite as well with so many injuries in the secondary for so much of the season. You're going to have these step back years, and I just think it's natural progression of building a program. And I also think that Arkansas probably it's if there's any such thing as peaking too early. They peaked really early under Sam Pittman, and I think it probably just underscores how impressive last season was. The fact that they had gone from being just dead in the water 2 years before to being a 9-win team last year really illustrates the type of job they did. I think probably what we're seeing now is more of the stepping stone type season that we expected to see from Arkansas as Pittman tries to build this program.
Yeah, I just think winning cures everything, man. And I think that even applies to this bowl game. Like if KJ, leads Arkansas's offense to a pretty impressive day with a group of young guys, including Rocket and some wide receivers that, maybe haven't gotten just a ton of playing time this year. And guys like Quincy McAdoo, Jordan Crook, Pooh Paul, they kind of go out and play well in this game. I think that right there is going to bring a little bit of optimism going into the future, because you look at those young guys, you're like, they're kind of committed to the team and they're talented, and they're going to get better in the off season after spring ball and summer workouts and then fall camp. I think, if Arkansas just goes out and performs and wins and takes care of business, even against, a kind of a mediocre team against Kansas, I think that breeds a little bit of optimism going into these, the end of the summer months and even the dog days of the summer.
Yeah, you mentioned that about winning. Frank Broyles was always against the playoffs, and one of the reasons he was that he said, you've got however many bowl games there were at that point. You have that many teams that go into the offseason with a lot of optimism, a lot of positivity, a lot of momentum going into the offseason. And so, it could be a momentum type building win for Arkansas, albeit against Kansas, if they do have a good showing in Memphis. I do want to mention real quick the defensive coordinator search. We don't know where Arkansas is going to go with this, but it's going to be a really interesting hire for Sam Pittman for so many reasons. And I think probably not least of which is the fact that we have not seen him have to hire a coordinator since he was first hired at Arkansas. He hired Kendall Briles, Barry Odom, and Scott Fountain, and almost kind of like rapid succession there in December of 2019. They've been able to hold people off that have come for Barry Odom for other defensive coordinator positions, maybe other head coaching positions that we don't know about. Same thing goes for Kendall Briles. Pittman has spoken on numerous occasions how there have been many schools that have come for both of those, but now they have to go find a new defensive coordinator, and they have to do it when they're coming off a season where they didn't play very good defensively, and they've got to do it in an off season where they're losing a lot of their best defensive players. It's a really interesting hire.
Yeah, there's no question. It's a big one that, is going to, dictate maybe the trajectory of one side of the football. I mean, you got to go out and make a good hire here. And, one of the names that's interesting to me that's, we've seen thrown around a lot is Trey Scott, Georgia's defensive line coach. He's young, for a coach, 38 years old. He's got ties to, Sam and Arkansas. He's from Crossett. And I think we've seen in the past that relationships and, ties to either Sam or to Arkansas is pretty big, because Sam likes to hire guys who are kind of all about the logo, all about the Razorback and the state, and wanting to work hard to make the state proud. And I think guy from Crossett, he grew up here. He knows what the logo's about and how much passion there is for the program and especially the football team. And I just think that's a really interesting name that's being thrown around. And he's been at Arkansas Tech, Arkansas State, Ole Miss, North Carolina, Georgia. So he's been around a little bit. So I'm going to be keeping a pretty close eye on Trey Scott. I think that would be a really solid hire for Sam if it happens.
He feels like he would be a hard sell, though, doesn't it? I mean, the fact that he doesn't have any coordinator experience, I think would make that a hard sell. Maybe it ends up happening.
I think
I've certainly had the same thought, just given he's got a great reputation and he's been in a program that knows how to play defense. And so,
yeah,
I think at some point somebody's going to give him a shot. It's just, it would kind of surprise me if Arkansas was the one.
Yeah, I think Arkansas fans, and I don't want to speak for anyone, but I think they see what Georgia's done on the defensive side of the ball the last few years. Just they've put some monsters on the field, like legitimately. And I would imagine that Trey Scott had a hand in at least getting some of those guys to campus and developing them and their skill sets and stuff. So I just think that, Georgia's emergence the last couple of years as a power in the league, and then that guy having, been a part of that and been kind of a key part of that is their D-line coach. I think a lot of people would welcome that, whether it's a hard sell or not. I don't know. To me, it seems fairly logical. Sam knows the guy, knows what he's about and how he works, and probably definitely knows how he recruits, I would imagine. So maybe it's not as hard of a sell, but maybe I'm just not thinking about it enough.
We've heard Scott's name, before mentioned with Arkansas. We think that, maybe he was a candidate here at one of those earlier times that they were trying to fill a defensive line position. That's an interesting name. I've been prefacing this with, I don't know what Sam Pittman wants to do. It's just these are people who would not surprise me if they were candidates given some of the ties. Some of the names, Scotty, that I've got in mind, Ryan Walters is the defensive coordinator at Illinois. They had a great season this year defensively. He went there from Missouri. He was Barry Odom's, kind of a protege for several years, both at Memphis and at Missouri. And, certainly somebody's going to give him a shot. Either Illinois is going to have to pay him or somebody's going to give him a shot to make a lot more money because of the production that he's had. Of course, he's been a coordinator within the SEC. I think that there's a lot of positives to potentially going that kind of route because, it's somebody who knows the type of defense that Arkansas has been running, has, the relationships with some of the coaches on staff. Again, that's a name that wouldn't surprise me. Jim Leonard's the big defensive coordinator, free agent right now, right? I mean, Wisconsin, former Broyles Award finalist, has certainly made a name for himself at Wisconsin, was their interim head coach for the final 7 games this year and went 4-3. And so, he might be in line for a head coaching position. He has said that he's not going to go back to Wisconsin. And then I just kind of go back through Sam Pittman's past and just see who he has got relationships with. And you don't know if these are good relationships or bad relationships. You just know they've coached together. Coaches who, have been defensive coordinators at the SEC level. You've got the co-defensive coordinator at Georgia right now. It seems like that would be really tough to pull him out of that situation. But Glenn Schumann is a co-defensive coordinator there who coached with Pittman for a few years when both of them were at Georgia. He's a co-DC, like I said, with Will Muschamp. I think we all know they're running Kirby Smart's defense there at Georgia. And then, another name that I think is kind of interesting, and again, I don't know if there's any thought of going this route, but it's Derek Ansley. He's a defensive backs coach for the Los Angeles Chargers, and he and Pittman were on staff together at Tennessee in 2012. And in 2019 and 20, Ansley was the defensive coordinator at Tennessee under Jeremy Pruitt, and they had some decent defenses during that time. I think their defense is ranked somewhere around 6th or 7th in the SEC in total defense and scoring defense during those seasons. So there's some names. Yeah, I think that's what everybody's doing right now. They're just throwing out names. Who knows what's going to happen? I think more often than not, when a new hire is made, whether it be a head coach, an assistant coach, it seems like they always come out of left field, right?
Yeah, it definitely does seem like that. Yeah, no doubt.
I think it'll be interesting to see how much he kind of gambles on this pick, on picking the coordinator, because I think Barry Odom was a very safe choice, especially for a first-time head coach on staff. And then with the position coaches that Barry brought with him, I think Sam really relied on Barry Odom's opinion heavily for the hiring of Coach Shearer and Coach Bowman. And so I think, like you guys said, relationships really matter to Sam Pittman. And we've talked on this podcast many times about how he's trying to turn Arkansas into Georgia Light-esque. And I think for those reasons, the guys that he has ties with on the Georgia staff make a lot of sense. But I also could just, like you said, just going for the home run hire and maybe throwing it all out there.
Well, I mean, if there's one thing that Arkansas has to offer, it's that, being a coordinator in the SEC is a really coveted job. And they've shown with Odom that they're willing to pay, a really good amount for a quality coordinator. He's making $1.85 million this year. I don't know if that's top 10 money, but it's pretty close in the coordinator sphere. And so, there's definitely the funds there if the candidate is right to potentially lure away a big name from somewhere else. Don't know when it's going to happen. You would seem to think that Arkansas would try to have a coordinator before the early signing period that begins December the 19th and runs through the 21st. So it'll be an interesting week here or so to see what happens for Arkansas on that front. Also, there's some rumors out there that Arkansas's other assistant coaches are being looked at for other jobs. We'll see if any of those materialize. Hope you'll come to our site, wholehogsports.com, for all of our coverage leading up to the Razorbacks bowl game. Of course, we're in full basketball gear too. The Razorbacks playing Oklahoma this weekend at BOK Center. Scotty, Andrew, Bob Holt, they had the basketball podcast of Mid-America earlier this week, and they'll have plenty of coverage from the Razorbacks basketball game against the Sooners. And until next time on the Whole Hog Football Podcast, for Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us.
The preceding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.